Hey guys, tonight we slip back into a year people later whispered about in tones that were somehow both bored and terrified. The year 536, the one some scholars casually label the worst year to be alive. You ease into the scene the way you might step into a cold room at midnight. Slowly, aware something feels off before you've even taken a breath. Above you, the sky hangs in a dull, washed-out grey, like someone smudged charcoal across the daylight. The sun shines, technically, but only the way a flashlight shines when its batteries are dying. And yes, you probably won't survive this, but that's okay. You're just here for the vibes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is over there. I genuinely love seeing that. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the streets as the strange, muffled daylight presses against everything it touches. At first, you think it's fog, or smoke, or maybe the world forgetting how to be bright. The air tastes dry and faintly metallic, as if the sky itself has been left out overnight and has gone a bit stale. People around you squint upward, blinking at the pale disk that should be the sun but looks more like a coin dropped in milk. A few mutter that it's an omen, others shrug because, honestly, what can you even do if the sky has decided to mope? A mainstream historical fact drifts across your mind. Several chroniclers from the Mediterranean describe this year unforgettably, writing that the sun gave forth its light without brightness. A cosy, understated way of saying everything felt wrong. You try to imagine writing that with a quill while holding back the creeping suspicion that your world has switched into low-power mode. A fringe little tidbit trails behind that thought. Some medieval storytellers later claimed birds flew in strange circles during this dimming, confused by the lack of shadows. Did that really happen? It's one of those things historians file under unverified but weird enough to enjoy, like crocodile dung sunscreen or monks who swore they once saw the moon split in two. The streets around you feel off balance. Shops open late because people keep oversleeping. The sky never brightens enough to shout, "Morning!" Farmers wander into town complaining that their roosters didn't crow at all, leading to the first unintentional snooze button in the world history. A baker waves you over, offering a loaf that didn't rise properly. "Blame the weather," he says. You nod politely, resisting the urge to give him a modern TED talk about volcanic aerosols. Historians still argue whether one massive volcanic eruption or several closely timed blasts caused this atmospheric gloom. You can practically hear scholarly voices debating, it was Iceland. No, it was North America. Actually, it might have been the tropics. Please read my new 800-page paper. The truth is still foggy, just like the year itself. You walk farther, and the quiet presses in. People don't chat much. When the sky looks like the world forgot saturation settings, small talk feels pointless. A shepherd sits on a stone wall nearby, glancing up at the dim sun like it owes him an apology. A few children chase each other, but even they seem unsettled by how shadows look thin and sickly. As you pass a water trough, you notice the surface doesn't sparkle. There's no glint of sunlight, just a flat, steel-grey reflection. It's like nature switched to grayscale mode and forgot the password to switch back. You dip your hand in, the water is colder than it should be for this season. You pull back, shaking droplets off your fingers, wondering how deep this chill will go. A merchant walks by, muttering about omens, carrying a bag of herbs he claims will balance the sky. That's his actual sales pitch. You admire the confidence. If Amazon existed, he'd have 3.2 stars and at least one angry review saying, "Did not fix the sun." As the day drifts on, you notice a growing tension. Farmers glance nervously at their fields, cloth merchants complain of gloomy colours, and even stray dogs wander more cautiously, as if the sky might fall on them at any moment. Your breath forms faint mist, in a month where it absolutely should not. The temperature feels like the season has lost its place in the queue. A small group of elders sit around a brazier, discussing old stories of strange skies and failed harvests. One insists he's seen this once before in his youth, though everyone else suspects he just wants to sound wise. Another leans close, whispering that the gods are angry, which is basically the ancient world's version of "have you tried turning it off and on again?" The air thickens with the sense that something huge is happening far beyond your sight. Something geological, atmospheric, or both. Whatever it is, You're living inside its consequences. The sky hasn't darkened fully into night, but it refuses to brighten into day. It hovers in that unsettling in-between, like a candle burning behind frosted glass. You take a longer breath and let the chilled air settle into your lungs. This is only the beginning. Ahead lies colder summers, failing crops, worried merchants carrying ominous news, and entire regions quietly sliding into hunger. But for now, you stand in the middle of a world that woke one morning to find its sun dimmed and its certainty shaken. Everything feels muted, strange, and slightly off. A world exhaling a tired, colourless breath. You keep walking beneath that stubborn, murky daylight, and as hours slide by, you realise something strange. The sun isn't actually moving. Or rather, it's moving, but without the usual drama, no bright rise, no warm arc, no satisfying golden descent. It just drifts, faint and embarrassed, across the sky like it's hoping nobody notices how underdressed it is. You tilt your head, trying to convince your eyes you're seeing daylight, but really it feels more like the world left the lights on low to conserve energy. You try to track your shadow. It wobbles vaguely at your feet, the way a toddler might draw it with a crayon. There's no crisp edge, no defining line. Just a blurry smudge that follows you out of obligation, like a co-worker who didn't want to be assigned to your group project. But here you are, stuck together. People around you have stopped pretending everything is normal. A farmer you passed earlier stands in the street again, arms folded, muttering that the sun looks sick. You want to tell him he's not wrong. Several Mediterranean writers actually recorded that daylight in 536 looked like through a tinted glass. That's a mainstream historical fact you let settle into your thoughts as the dim glow presses against your skin. They weren't exaggerating. You're living inside that description. As you move through the nearly shadowless evening, a quirky little rumour floats by. Someone claims the sun has been stolen by mountain spirits, and the only solution is to leave bowls of warm milk outside your door. You file that one under cultural folklore meets crisis mode wishful thinking. Someone else insists they saw two suns fighting in the sky during dawn, which is impressive considering you can barely make out the one you've got. People are grasping for explanations like they're picking herbs in a dark room. Anything that feels familiar, comforting, or, at the very least, dramatic. Historians still argue whether this dimming was caused by one cataclysm or several. A string of eruptions creating a global sunglasses effect. You picture scholars flexing charts at each other like medieval Pokemon cards. I choose Icelandic ash plume data. No, I counter with North American volcanic sulfur concentrations. It's all very academic and very passionate, which is fair because the sky genuinely does look like it needs debugging. As you wander onward, the usual rhythm of life feels suspended. The marketplace doesn't bustle, it murmurs. People speak in low tones, unsure if raising their voices might disturb whatever thin layer of light is left. You overhear a merchant explaining to a nervous shopper that the sun isn't gone. It's just very tired. That's one way to put it. You've seen houseplants perkier than this daylight. You pass a woman with a basket of cloth, and she holds up a bolt of red fabric that should glow in the sun but now looks like it's been washed 50 times in cold water. She sighs and mutters that everything looks haunted. You don't correct her. She's not wrong. Even animals behave differently. A flock of birds swoops low, navigating with awkward hesitations as if the muted sky has erased their horizon. One crashes into a shed roof and ricochets off unharmed, clearly embarrassed. You consider the possibility that it's having the same existential crisis you are. At the town well, a crowd gathers, not to gossip, but simply because people are seeking places to stand together. Humans get clingy when the atmosphere feels broken. The water below reflects a dull silver. No spark, no shine. You drop a pebble in and watch ripples pass through a surface that looks more like liquid tin than water. Temperature dips gently as you breathe in. It's not brutal yet, just unsettling enough to remind you that the world is cooling from above, not below. Summer should warm your sleeves and cheeks, yet your breath flirts with visible mist again. You rub your hands and keep walking, feeling the cold creeping into the seams of your clothes. A group of children huddle near a doorway, drawing patterns in the dusty ground. One child complains she can't tell what time it is anymore. Another shrugs and says, "It's always almost night," which feels uncomfortably accurate. Toy sticks and dolls lie at their feet, their colours dull, Everything looks like it's been filtered through low contrast mode. You glance upward again, trying to will the sun into brightness. It hangs there like a washed-out coin, too bright to call a moon, yet too dim to be a sun. You wonder how many people are doing the same thing in far-off lands right now, staring up, squinting, silently hoping the sky snaps back into focus. You're not imagining the global nature of this dimming. Far beyond where you stand, chroniclers in China write about yellow fog, starving harvests, and winter frost in the middle of summer. In Ireland, monks later describe a year without bread. You let that sink in as you watch dust drift through the air. A world-spanning gloom uniting people who'll never know each other, all blinking up at the same ghostly sun. Your steps take you past a lonely vineyard, vines drooping as if they've given up on the idea of ripening. A farmer kicks the soil gently. It feels colder than it should. He doesn't look surprised. He's already accepted this season as a lost cause. You hear him mutter about abandoned gods or misaligned stars. Someone walking past corrects him, insisting it's punishment for human failings, which to be fair is an all-purpose explanation in most centuries. As the day drifts on, though the word day feels generous, another unsettling detail settles over you. Your inner sense of time begins to dissolve. Without clear sunrises or sunsets, your internal clock shuffles like a bored guard. You keep checking the sky's brightness, but it never changes more than a shade or two. It's like living inside a painting that refuses to dry. Shops close early, not because it's dark, but because people are tired. This kind of light drains morale the way bad Wi-Fi drains patience. You find yourself yawning at odd moments, unsure whether your body is confused or simply giving up. A dog trots by, glances at you, and yawns too. An international symbol for I don't know what time it is either. As you continue onward, a quiet truth settles into your bones. This isn't a passing haze or an inconvenient cloudy week. This is the atmosphere rewriting its rules, dimming the world into a slow, anxious twilight that refuses to move on. And deep down, you feel it. This muted sun is only the first warning. You wake the next morning, or what you assume is morning, to a cold that doesn't belong here. Your breath hovers in front of you like a small ghost, drifting lazily before fading into the dim grey air. Summer should be warm enough to soften the ground, warm enough to coax crops upward, warm enough for you to complain about sweating through your shirt. Instead, you wrap your cloak tighter and shuffle forward, wondering why July feels like the inside of a forgotten cellar. You step outside and the daylight hasn't improved. It still hangs over everything like a half-hearted theatre spotlight, illuminating just enough to remind you that the world is supposed to be awake. A neighbour spots you and waves half-heartedly, not out of friendliness, but out of that unspoken, we're in this weirdness together, energy people get when nature becomes unpredictable. A mainstream historical fact floats through your thoughts. Scholars analysing ancient ice cores found proof that temperatures plunged dramatically, starting in 536, some regions dropping 2 to 4 degrees Celsius, enough to trigger catastrophic crop failures. 4 degrees doesn't sound like much until you realise it's basically Mother Nature, turning down the thermostat and forcing everyone to wear sweaters in July. You walk past a nearby field and stop short. The crops look stunted, as if they tried to grow and got discouraged halfway. Leaves curl inward, stems droop, and the ground feels firm beneath your feet, where it should be muddy with summer rain. A farmer stands nearby, tugging off his cap, staring at his land with the tired look of someone negotiating with the soil. He sees you and says, "It's like winter forgot to leave." You nod because honestly that's the most accurate weather report anyone's given all day. A quirky little rumour drifts by on the chilled wind. Someone claims that monsters living beneath the earth have stolen all the warmth, hoarding it deep underground like draconic misers. A baker insists it's punishment from the heavens for people not attending temple regularly, and someone else counters that maybe the sun is grieving, which would be adorable if it weren't freezing your fingers off. Historians still argue whether this sudden global cooling was caused by volcanic sulfur particles reflecting sunlight away or by massive ash clouds blocking solar radiation outright. You can practically hear them sighing over their microscopes. Was it sulfate aerosols? Was it particulate density? Why won't nature leave a neatly labelled note? It's comforting, in a weird way, that even experts admit the atmosphere in 536 is one huge mystery box. You keep walking, your boots crunching lightly on what should be soft earth. The birds are quieter today. Even they seem unsure whether to migrate early or stick around and hope the sun gets its act together. A few flutter low to the ground, searching for insects that have gone into hiding. One bird chirps half-heartedly at you as if asking, "You cold too?" You consider chirping back but decide you're not fluent enough. Your stomach growls, not out of hunger yet, but out of anticipation. Everyone knows what cold summers mean. Disappointing harvests, shrinking grain stores, and that creeping sense that winter's going to hit harder than it should. You glance across a hillside where sheep huddle together, their wool damp and unfluffed. Even they look confused, staring up at the washed-out sky like, is this normal? Near a well, a small crowd gathers around a scholar who has decided today is the perfect day for a public lecture. He points at the sky dramatically. The heavens have dimmed. The warmth has been devoured. Someone in the back mutters that he's just making things sound fancy to justify his job. You chuckle quietly, earning a curious glance from a woman clutching a basket of wilted herbs. The cold follows you through the village. It isn't harsh, not yet, but it's wrong, like seeing frost on a birthday cake. You tug your cloak again and feel the woven fabric stiff with chill. When you reach a group of children attempting to play near a fountain, you hear one girl complain that her hands hurt from the cold. Another says she dreamed the world was freezing over, and honestly, the dream doesn't sound far off. The fountain's water trickles sluggishly. Thin slivers of ice cling to the edges, tiny but unmistakable. You stare for a moment, letting the significance sink in. Ice. In summer. It's the kind of detail that would make a modern meteorologist quit and go raise goats in the countryside. The air grows colder as the day continues. People walk faster, shoulders hunched, voices low. The clothesline behind a house carries shirts that sway stiffly, as though they dried in the wrong season. Someone swears they saw their own breath earlier and is now telling everyone with dramatic flourish. You pull your hands close to your chest, half laughing because you've been seeing your breath all morning. Welcome to the club. At the edge of town, you watch a field where a single farmer works alone, hoeing the soil with stubborn determination. He pauses, wipes his forehead, and sighs as he sees you. The ground's frozen beneath, he says quietly. He taps the earth with his tool, producing a hard, muted thud. That sound shouldn't exist in summer. You take a breath and let the cold settle into your lungs, the air crisp in a way that feels more like February than June. A quiet truth forms behind your ribs. This isn't just an eerie sky anymore. The dim light is reaching deeper, reshaping the land, bending the seasons, and leaving the natural world confused and shivering. You stand still, watching the pale sun hang low in the sky as if apologizing for this mess. The year 536 has barely begun unraveling, and already the world is colder, quieter, and far more fragile than anyone wants to admit. You push onward through the chilled afternoon, the pale sky still clinging to its washed-out glow, like a lantern whose wick has been trimmed too short. People move with a strange, shared hesitation, as if the whole world has become a hallway where the lights keep flickering, and everyone's pretending not to notice. But whispers are starting. You hear them in doorways, near wells, beside half-frozen fields. Something caused this. Something big. Something distant. Something no one alive has seen or understands. As you pass a cluster of villagers huddled around a brazier, you catch the drifting tone of worry turning into rumour. One man insists the mountain gods have erupted in anger. Another swears the world's edge cracked open and swallowed the sun's warmth. Then an older woman taps her cane twice on the ground, the universal sign for stop being dramatic, and says simply, "Something exploded far away." You file that under accidental accuracy, because she's closer to the truth than anyone else here realizes. A mainstream historical fact surface in your thoughts. Scientists studying ice cores have found evidence of a massive volcanic eruption, or perhaps several, occurring right around 536, ejecting sulfur and ash high into the stratosphere. Enough material to veil the entire planet for months. Enough to dim the sun. Enough to make summers feel stolen. It's one of those moments where you're glad to live in a time with labs instead of oracles. You walk to a ridge overlooking farmland, and the horizon looks oddly smudged, the world fading into grey before it reaches the distant tree line. You squint, and for the first time you think you see it. A faint dustiness in the air that isn't fog, isn't smoke, and isn't mist. It's something finer, lighter, like sifted flour drifting invisibly, caught in sunlight that isn't strong enough to sparkle through it. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. Medieval chroniclers claimed that in some regions ash fell like a thin powder, without any nearby fires. One even insisted it tasted faintly bitter, which means at least one person in the 6th century looked at mysterious atmospheric dust and said, "I should probably lick that." You respect the scientific courage, questionable as it may be. Historians still argue whether the world was struck by a single colossal volcanic eruption or a 1-2 punch from multiple volcanoes in different hemispheres. Some point to Iceland. Glaciers there hold chemical fingerprints of an eruption around this time. Others argue for a North American supervolcano. And a few quietly suggest a tropical blast so enormous that it rained sulfur across continents. The debate is gentle but intense. The academic equivalent of "it was him," "no, it was her," "actually it might have been all of them." You descend the ridge, letting the cold wind nip at your cheeks. The sky's pale haze thickens slightly as you enter a forest path. Light filters down in eerie, diffuse sheets. No sharp beams, no warm spots. Just a consistent, ghost-like glow that makes the trees seem flatter and taller than they are. A squirrel pauses on a branch, staring at you as if sharing the same uneasy thought. What happened to the sun? Who messed with it? And why? Branches crunch softly under your boots even though the ground should be moist with summer rain. The air feels dry, unnaturally so, the kind of dryness that belongs near volcanic ash. You imagine this strange atmosphere forming thousands of miles away, rising from a caldera with a roar no one here heard, then drifting into global circulation, like a dark traveller with a long itinerary. A woodcutter steps from behind a tree, wiping his hands on his tunic. He glances at the sky and says, "Smoke sits wrong today." You nod. He isn't wrong, though calling this smoke is like calling a tidal wave a splash. This is the atmosphere wearing a shroud. Back in the village, a small procession gathers outside the meeting hall. People arrive with that restless tension of folks hoping for answers but expecting none. A robed speaker steps forward, raising his hands for quiet. He talks about omens, divine disapproval, celestial imbalance, all the classic hits. The crowd listens politely because it's better than staring at the sky worrying alone. But you notice the few farmers at the back exchange looks like, "We don't care about omens, we care about crops, which is fair." You drift toward them and overhear one muttering that this must be volcanic, though he doesn't know the word. He describes a distant fire mountain belching smoke so high the heavens choke on it. Another adds that perhaps several fire mountains erupted at once, which would be quite the group project. You smile quietly at their unintentional accuracy. The cold creeps deeper as the day slips on, and you feel a hush settle over everything. Even the breeze seems cautious, as if the air itself is exhausted. You walk past a blacksmith who has stepped outside to examine a faint dusting stuck along the wooden beams of his roof. He rubs it between his fingers, frowns, sniffs it, then shrugs. The universal sign for, "It's not deadly yet, but it's weird." You wonder what he'd think if he knew the dust might have begun its journey near a volcanic crater thousands of kilometers away. A few women carry baskets of laundry toward the river, their steps slow, their eyes scanning the dim horizon. One breaks the silence with a nervous laugh, saying, "At least the sunburns will be mild this year." A second woman adds, "Good, my skin can't handle another summer like last time." You watch them chuckle, finding humour in everything they can because humour is cheaper than hope, and hope is running low. The path leads you toward a hillside orchard where fruit hangs small and underdeveloped. A beekeeper stands nearby, lifting a lid to check his hives. The bees emerge sluggishly, confused by the cold. Their buzz is faint, hesitant, a sound like uncertainty made audible. You feel it in your bones too. As you continue, the sky darkens slightly, though you can't tell if evening is approaching or if the haze is thickening. Light and shadow blend together in a flat wash. You rub your arms, feeling the chill settle deeper. And for a moment, everything falls silent except for your own footsteps. The year 536 isn't just dimming, it's deepening. The sky's a mystery, the cold is unnatural, and the world is starting to sense that something massive, something volcanic, has rewritten the rules of living. This is no passing storm. This is the beginning of a long global twilight. By now you've grown used to the greyness, the way the sky sulks all day without ever fully darkening or brightening, but today something feels different. The air itself seems thicker, like you're walking through a room where someone has just shaken out a dusty blanket. You run your fingers along a wooden railing and come away with a faint pale film on your skin. It doesn't look like normal dust from houses and hay. It feels lighter, finer, almost like the world has been gently sprinkled with ground glass. You rub your thumb and forefinger together, watching the tiny particles smear and vanish. They don't smell like much. They don't sting. They're just there, quiet, persistent, and everywhere. The kind of thing you wouldn't notice if you weren't paying attention, until you realize you've been breathing it in all day, Cozy thought. A mainstream historical fact slips into your mind. Written accounts from this period, from regions as far apart as the Eastern Mediterranean and Asia, describe a strange, dry fog hanging over the world. A haze that dimmed the sun but didn't act like normal clouds. It didn't bring rain. It didn't disperse. It just lingered day after day, the way an awkward silence lingers after someone makes a weird joke at dinner. You step outside the village and walk up a low hill. From there you can see the landscape laid out like a muted painting. Fields, forests, distant rooftops, all washed in that same dull tone. You squint and notice something new. When you look toward the sun, there's a faint halo around it, a pale ring that shouldn't be there. It's beautiful in a slightly ominous way, like atmospheric jewelry you didn't order. The wind picks up a little, and you feel it carry that fine dust against your cheeks, soft as flour. A neighbour trudges past with a cloth wrapped loosely around his nose and mouth. "Helps with the bad air," he mutters, sounding like a 6th century early adopter of DIY masking. Another man snorts and says it's pointless, then coughs dramatically, which is not the strongest argument. A quirky rumour drifts to you from a pair of gossiping women on the path. Someone swears that if you leave a dark bowl of water outside, overnight you'll find ash from the sky settled on top of it by morning. Proof, they say, that the heavens themselves are shedding. Someone else claims this ash has healing properties if mixed into an herbal poultice. You quietly hope they don't test that too aggressively. Human history already has enough. We licked the weird substance and regretted it moments. Historians still argue whether the veil of particles comes mostly from one titanic volcanic blast or from a series of eruptions feeding the sky like a furnace being stoked. Some models suggest a northern volcano, others a tropical crater, and some argue the atmosphere might have been loaded in stages, first a massive eruption, then follow-up blasts that kept the world dimmed. You picture charts, simulations, and researchers staring at graphs at 2 a.m. with the same expression you're wearing right now. What on earth happened? You descend the hill, brushing your cloak occasionally and watching more of the pale film gather along the seams. It doesn't pile up dramatically like snow. It just builds in this quiet, almost polite way. You check the windowsills of houses and see the same thin layers forming, soft and powdery, collecting along the edges where breeze meets wood. The world is slowly being repainted in invisible strokes. Inside a workshop, a carpenter grumbles as he wipes surfaces yet again. "I cleaned this table yesterday," he complains, running his hand over a board that already looks faintly hazed. The dust comes back without being invited. His apprentice, trying to be helpful, suggests it might be a sign of abundance. The carpenter raises an eyebrow in a way that says, very clearly, "Please stop talking." You notice how moods seem to sag alongside the seasons. The light never really brightens. The air always feels a bit clogged, and people have started to move as if they're slightly heavier than they used to be. No one has the energy for big arguments. Petty disagreements drift off halfway through, because it's hard to maintain a dramatic tone when the sun looks like it's hiding behind frosted glass. In the marketplace, you see a woman fold her scarves more tightly over her hair, shaking off tiny particles before wrapping them. A man selling bread keeps brushing at his stall canopy. He jokes that at least the ash might add flavour, then immediately clarifies that he's kidding so customers don't riot. Even humour is careful now, wrapped in disclaimers like fragile pottery. Closer to the city's outskirts, you pass a small shrine. Someone has placed a bowl of water there, just like the rumour described. You pause and lean closer. The surface is faintly cloudy, tiny grains drifting near the edges, barely visible unless the dim light hits at just the right angle. You back away slowly, your mind connecting dots. The thin dust, the dry fog, the dim sun, the strange cold. Somewhere far away a mountain tore itself open and flung part of its insides into the sky. And now, months later, you're inhaling its ghost. You wander toward a river and notice the way the haze dulls the reflections on the water. Normally, even on cloudy days, the river would shimmer and flicker, catching stray beams of sun. Today it lies flat and metallic, as if a thin film covers the surface. A fisherman on the bank grumbles that the fish seems slower, less active. Maybe they're sleepy too, he says. You both watch a ripple travel across the dull surface, then fade without sparkle. In the evenings, if you can call them that, something almost pretty happens. As the dim sun slumps toward the horizon, the sky takes on muted shades of red and orange, blushing faintly through the particle-laden air. It's not the vibrant sunset you'd see in a healthy sky. It's more like the afterglow from a world trying to remember how to be bright. People stand and stare more often now, drawn to those rare moments of colour. One child points and whispers, "The sky is bleeding." You quietly hope that's not a metaphor that sticks. You sleep poorly, waking often to cough or clear your throat. Even indoors, the fine dust finds its way in through cracks and gaps. You run a cloth along the edge of a table by candlelight and watch the line of pale powder gather like sand along a tiny shore. The candle's flame burns with a slightly fainter halo, as if the air is just a little too crowded. Outside, somewhere beyond your view, the seasons lean out of balance. Spring arrives weakly. Summer never commits. Autumn edges in early, its chill amplified by the dim sunlight. You can almost feel the Earth's calendar stumbling over itself. If time had a soundtrack, it would be playing slightly off-beat. You lie down at the end of this ashy, muted day and realize something unsettling. The particles swirling in the air around you might linger for years in the upper atmosphere, circling the globe, dimming the sun for people you'll never meet. From distant farms to imperial courts, from mountain villages to coastal ports, everyone is inhaling the same invisible fingerprints of catastrophe. And as you drift toward uneasy sleep, the ash keeps falling, soft, patient, and utterly indifferent. You wake to a muted thump outside. Not an alarming sound, just the weight of someone setting down a sack with that specific, "Please let this last longer than it will" energy. When you step outside, you see the baker hunched over a small pile of grain, turning it over with a tight, unhappy expression. A few neighbours hover nearby, pretending not to stare, but very obviously counting how many bread loaves that pile could become. The answer is, not nearly enough. The cold summer, the dim sky, the drifting ash, it's all starting to catch up to the fields. And now, in corners of the world like this one, the quiet early signs are showing. Grain that should be tall is only knee-high. Vegetables are small, stunted, stubbornly, refusing to grow like they're protesting on behalf of the entire plant kingdom. And the harvest season, which should promise overflowing baskets and long meal prep gossip sessions, is looking like it might barely fill a few sacks. A mainstream historical fact slips gently into your thoughts. In the year 536 and the years following, written sources from multiple regions describe widespread crop failures: barley, wheat, grapes, and fruits that either never ripened or rotted early. Economies that depended on consistent harvests saw immediate strain. Famine wasn't everywhere yet, but it was beginning its slow creep, the way frost creeps up a window pane. You stand at the edge of a field and listen to two farmers arguing in low voices. One insists the land has lost its spirit. The other mutters that taxes should be lowered because even the king can't eat the sun. That's surprisingly poetic for someone who looks like he's wrestled oxen his whole life. You're tempted to applaud, but the mood is bleak enough that maybe hold off for now. A quirky rumour drifts over from the other side of the field. Someone claims that because the sky is dim, underground creatures have begun waking earlier than usual and devouring crops at night. Another insists that sky dust kills plant roots unless you bless the soil 3 nights in a row. A young shepherd tries it, solemnly poking at the ground with a stick and whispering charms. His sheep watch him with the same expression they give thunderstorms. Historians still argue whether the famine began primarily because of the volcanic dimming itself, or because several regions were already vulnerable, stretched thin by wars, poor policies, or over-farming. It's one of those open debates where experts politely disagree for hundreds of pages and then go get coffee together like nothing happened. You take comfort in that. Even scholars know the world is complicated. You walk toward the granary, a long, low building that should echo with the sound of wooden scoops and busy labourers measuring, weighing and tallying. Instead you hear almost nothing. A few workers shuffle around inside, moving slowly, counting slowly, whispering numbers in tones that sound more like apologies than inventory. When you peek through the open door, you see the truth plainly. The bins are not empty, but they're far too light for this point in the year. A man carrying a ledger spots you and says, "It should be full." He doesn't say anything else. He doesn't need to. You wander deeper into the village. People are eating, but carefully. Portions are smaller, meals are stretched. You see a pot on a cook fire with more water than ingredients. A woman stirs it while her children sit close, watching every lazy bubble rise to the surface. She gives you a polite smile, but her eyes shift back to the pot instantly, as if afraid it might evaporate out of sheer stubbornness. The market, once busy enough to feel pleasantly chaotic, now has a gentler, uneasy rhythm. Fewer stalls, thinner produce. Bread sells quickly and disappears fast. A butcher offers smaller cuts for the same price. Not because he's greedy, because the animals themselves have less fat from grazing on undergrown grass. A fisherman hauls his net from the river and sighs. The catch is thin. Even the fish look tired, he mutters. You nod. Everything feels tired. You walk along a road leading away from the village and see a line of travellers heading toward another town, carrying light bundles and the tense, hopeful posture of people looking for better conditions. Some bring herbs, others bring tools. One leads a goat who looks like it has no idea why it's part of this relocation project. You overhear someone say the next valley over has had better luck with its barley, but another traveller whispers that's probably a rumour invented to keep spirits up. People cling to hope like it's a rope, fraying, but still something to hold. Near the edge of a field, you find an old man kneeling beside rows of wilted plants. He gently cups one in his hand, his thumb rubbing a leaf that bends too easily. He murmurs a prayer, or maybe just an apology, and for a moment the whole world feels still. When he finally rises, he sighs deeply, like a person trying to carry more than his body allows. The cold settles heavier as the day drags on. You feel it in your arms, your toes, the bridge of your nose. You try to shake it off, but the wind nips harder, a reminder that the atmosphere hasn't finished its work yet. The sun, pale and useless, hangs overhead like a lantern someone forgot to refill. Back in the centre of town, a small group gathers to discuss winter preparations, months earlier than usual. They talk about reducing grain rations, storing more wood, fortifying livestock pens, and possibly pooling resources between households. The conversation is serious and calm, but underneath everything, there's the quiet pulse of fear. Not loud panic, not chaos, just the slow tightening of uncertainty around everyone's ribs. You walk away, listening to the dim hush of the world, and feel something settle into your bones. The famine hasn't arrived yet, but it's walking toward you. Quiet, patient, unavoidable, and with every day the sun refuses to shine, you sense it drawing closer. You start your morning with a simple plan. Walk to the fields, check the crops, maybe find some small sign, any sign, that the world hasn't completely given up on growing things. But as soon as you step outside, you feel it in the air again. That same strange, muted cold, like the year forgot which season it's supposed to be. And the fields? They look worse today. Not dramatically worse. Nothing dramatic happens in 536. But everything is just a little bit smaller, a little bit paler, a little more tired. Even the scarecrow looks like it's reconsidering its career. You trudge into the farmland, boots sinking into soil that feels both too firm and too damp, like the ground can't make up its mind. Nothing grows right anymore. Barley is stunted. Wheat heads look brittle. The vegetables sag under their own underwhelming weight. You squat down, run your fingers along a row of drooping leaves, and realize you've seen livelier salads in medieval paintings, and those weren't exactly known for botanical accuracy. A mainstream historical fact drifts up as you study the fields. Chroniclers from the Mediterranean, China, and Northern Europe all wrote about failed harvests during these years. In some places, the crops didn't grow at all. In others, they grew halfway, and then stalled like they suddenly remembered they left the oven on. Modern climate studies confirm that sudden cooling can reduce growing seasons by weeks, even months, more than enough to turn thriving fields into ghostly, underfed ones. You hear voices behind you. Two farmers having an intense but exhausted debate. One claims the soil has lost its warmth, that seeds are shivering underground. The other says the fields are cursed because last year's festival was done on the wrong moon phase. Someone nearby suggests that maybe weeds have learned to steal sunlight. You don't have the heart to break it to them that the sunlight can't even manage to shine on you, let alone be stolen. Historians still argue whether the worst agricultural losses came from the dimming itself, or from the chain reaction of colder oceans, disrupted rainfall and delayed seasons. Some believe crops died primarily from lack of warmth. Others insist the lack of light was the main culprit. You can practically imagine a group of scholars in heated debate. It was photosynthesis. No, it was frost. Gentlemen, please, let's blame both equally. The truth lies somewhere in the overlapping chaos. You wander deeper into the farmland and it's eerily quiet. This should be the loud season. Summer work, shouts across fields, animals being herded, laughter, complaints, the earthy soundtrack of daily life. But now the silence stretches out like a blanket. Even the cows seem confused, shifting nervously and lowing in soft, uncertain tones, as if trying to ask why the pasture grass tastes like sadness this year. A boy runs up with a small bundle of wilted stalks in his arms. He hands them to his father, who turns the plants over in a slow, heavy motion. "This should have been twice this size," the father mutters. The boy looks at him with a mixture of confusion and unspoken fear. You can't help feeling something twist low in your stomach. Scarcity is one thing. Scarcity with children involved is another. You walk toward the livestock pens where goats nibble at thin, limp strands of grass. A shepherd tells you milk yields have dropped sharply. "They're eating all day, but it isn't enough," he says, shaking his head. "The land isn't feeding them, and they can't feed us." You watch one goat stare back at you, chewing slowly, almost apologetically. You resist the urge to tell it that none of this is its fault. Further along, you spot a woman kneeling by her failing herb garden. She plucks a leaf, rubs it between her fingers, then brings it to her nose. "Weak," she whispers. "No scent." She glances up at you with a wry smile. Imagine surviving a world crisis and not even getting good basil out of it. You smile back, joke number one, but her voice carries real exhaustion beneath the humour. Near the riverbank, you meet a fisherman mending his nets. He explains that fish stocks seem thinner. "Too cold," he says, shrugging. "They swim deeper, harder to catch." You sit with him for a moment, watching the dim light ripple across the water, though ripple is generous. It looks more like someone lightly brushed paint across a steel plate. A quirky rumour breezes by along the river path. Apparently, some villagers believe the dim sun is making plants too shy to grow. Another claims fairies are stealing warmth from the soil and selling it to mountain spirits. A third insists that if you whisper your worries into a bean pod, the plant might grow out of sympathy. Someone actually tries it. The bean pod does not respond. You give them credit for optimism, though. By midday, or what passes for midday in this eternal dusk, you head toward the grain store. A crowd has gathered at the entrance. They aren't panicking. They aren't shouting. They're waiting quietly, which is somehow worse. A man with a ledger announces weekly distribution changes. Smaller portions, stricter guidelines, shared households, pooling reserves. No one protests. They just nod. Acceptance is a type of exhaustion too. You see a woman in the crowd clutching a bag of barley that could fit into two cupped hands. She whispers to her friend, "Maybe the next valley has more." Her friend shakes her head, saying, "They say it's worse there." You don't know who's right. You suspect neither of them is. As you walk back toward the village, you notice the subtle behavioural changes around you. People glance at pantry shelves more often. Children are given smaller snacks. Dogs hover closer during meals. Families save leftovers even when there aren't any leftovers to save. And the cold, that persistent whispering chill, follows you like a shadow. It isn't deadly yet, but it feels like a stranger waiting outside your door, tapping gently, politely, insistently. The true famine hasn't arrived, but the fields are failing. The livestock is thinning. The grain bins sound hollow. People are rationing before they're forced to, and the world around you, pale, dim, dust-choked, is preparing for hunger the way a body prepares for sickness. quietly, slowly, in ways you barely notice until it's too late. You head toward the main road just as a low whistle echoes between the dim houses, the kind travellers use when approaching a village so they don't get greeted with pitchforks. You pause, listening. Moments later you see them, a small caravan of merchants making their slow, careful way into town. Their carts look lighter than they should, and their faces carry that universal expression of people who've been walking too long in weather that refuses to act normal. Travellers have become rare these days. Roads feel colder, nights feel darker, and long journeys across half-lit landscapes don't appeal to many. But the merchants who still move between regions, they carry something more valuable than goods now. They carry news, the kind that whispers across continents, shifting shape but always carrying a kernel of truth. You drift toward the gathering crowd as the merchants stop in the square, stretching their backs and brushing thin layers of sky dust off their cloaks. One of them, a tall man with a wind-chapped face, taps the side of his cart and sighs. "Don't expect much," he says. "We've seen too many empty fields." A mainstream historical fact floats into your mind. Written sources from China to the Byzantine Empire record that 536 wasn't just a bad local year, it was global. Travellers, monks, diplomats, and merchants all noted the same eerie dimming, the same pale sun, the same sudden cold, the same crop failures. It's one of those rare moments when human history syncs up across thousands of miles. Everyone looked at the sky and thought, in their own languages, "What is happening?" You step closer, listening as a group of villagers pepper the merchants with questions. Is it the same where you came from? Is it true the river froze early? Did the mountains really turn black? The merchants drink water, wipe their faces, and offer the kind of answers that sound true, not because they're comforting, but because they're unsettling in the same way your own world is. "We came from the west," one says, "dim skies the whole way." "A cold wind from the north," another adds. "Colder than winter should be." "Fields failing everywhere," a third murmurs. "Islands starving. Italy's asking prayers for sunlight. They say even the emperor's advisors don't know what's happening." You feel the crowd tilt slightly, the air tightening with communal silence. Then comes a quirky rumour, carried with the same seriousness as actual facts, as always happens during hard times. One merchant lowers his voice, leaning in as if delivering great secret knowledge. "They say in the Far East, a dragon swallowed the sun." Someone in the crowd murmurs, "How large is the dragon?" Because once you accept that a dragon might be involved, you want the details to be accurate. Another traveller rolls his eyes. "It's not a dragon," he says. "It's smoke, thick enough to blot out heaven." A villager frowns. But no fires that large have burned. The merchant gestures vaguely toward the horizon. "Not here," he says. "Somewhere far enough we don't see the flames, only the sky they wounded." Historians still argue whether these early travel rumours exaggerated the global dimming or accurately captured the sense of living under a persistent veil. Some accounts mention glowing skies, others mention perpetual twilight. A few even describe the sun as a blood-red disk, which could be poetic flair or simply another Tuesday in 536. Who knows? Scholars are still piecing together the atmospheric puzzle, debating not just what happened, but how it felt to the people who lived it. You move around the merchants' carts, noting how their goods look dull under the sickly light. Cloth that should shine looks flat. Pottery glazes look subdued. Fruit, what little they carry, looks smaller and slightly bruised, as if the world's colour palette has been turned down several notches. One merchant pulls out a rolled map, tapping a route as he speaks. "We travelled from the coast," he explains. "Everywhere, the same complaints. No sun, no warmth, no harvest." He hesitates, then adds quietly, "Some villages have already moved their people, or what's left of them." That sentence hits the crowd like a cold gust. A woman near you clutches her shawl tighter. "Moved?" she asks. "Moved where?" "South," he replies. "Where they hope it's warmer." "Is it?" another villager asks. He shakes his head. "Not much." Silence again. This kind of silence always feels heavier under dim skies. You ask one of the travellers how far the haze stretches. He looks up, squinting at the pale disk overhead. "As far as we've walked," he says simply, "and farther than that from what we hear." Another traveller leans his elbow on a barrel. "We met a trader who came from beyond the mountains," he says. "Says the sky there looked the same, says snow fell in the wrong month." He shrugs. Maybe he lied. Or maybe the world really is turning upside down. Then comes a softer rumour, almost whispered, that in Constantinople scholars have begun writing letters, warning each other of years of dimness, that monks copying manuscripts are doing so by lamplight at midday, that palace gardens are wilting, that even the imperial treasury is guarding grain supplies like gold. Travellers always bring gossip mixed with truth. Inside a small tavern, you sit near the merchants as they eat. The food is plain and sparse, but they seem grateful. Between mouthfuls they trade stories. A village where chickens stopped laying eggs. A monastery where the vines shriveled before ripening. A port city where fog clings so thick to the sea that ships wait days to depart. A distant region where people say the sun hasn't cast a shadow in months. You glance at your own faint shadow on the tavern floor. Strange, blurry, almost embarrassed. Shadows aren't meant to be soft-edged in summer. When the meal ends, the merchants gather their things. One hands the innkeeper a small cloth pouch in exchange for food and lodging. Coins clink inside, but you have the sense they won't buy as much as they once did. When the merchants finally leave the village, the crowd disperses slowly. Not out of boredom, but out of the heavy realization that the gloom isn't local, isn't temporary, and isn't something you can outwait with optimism and prayer. It's everywhere. Everywhere they've been. Everywhere they've heard of. Everywhere people live beneath the same bruised sky. And as you walk home, the cold wind brushes past your face, almost whispering the truth travellers have carried from horizon to horizon. This isn't a strange season. This is a changed world. You wake the next morning to a sound you weren't expecting. The unmistakable murmur of a crowd gathering near the marketplace. Not the lively marketplace hum you'd hear in normal years, but a low, worried buzz, the kind people make when they're trying not to panic in public. You pull on your cloak, step into the grey light, and head toward the noise. When you arrive, you see the reason instantly. The price board has been changed again. Numbers crossed out, new ones scratched in, higher, always higher. The grain merchant stands stiffly beside his stall, arms folded defensively, while a couple of villagers argue nearby. Not shouting, no one has the energy for shouting anymore, but debating in that quiet, sharp tone people use when their lives are being rearranged without their consent. One woman gestures at the board. "How can flour cost that much? It was half this price last month." The merchant rubs his temple and sighs. "And I paid double to bring it here. Half the caravans turned back. The rest demanded more coin. If the supply shrinks, the cost rises. That's how the world works." A mainstream historical fact settles into your thoughts. When climates collapse, markets follow. Chroniclers of the 6th century recorded sharp fluctuations in grain prices, in some regions doubling or tripling as shortages tightened their grip. Byzantine sources mention panicked buying, disrupted trade routes, and entire local economies teetering as food became both rarer and more expensive. Wealth couldn't summon harvests any more than prayers could. You walk through the square, watching the unfolding scene. A man holding a basket with a single loaf complains that his silver doesn't stretch as far as it used to. Another whispers that his employer lowered wages because business is slow. A third mutters that he's considering selling a goat, practically a family member, just to stock up before prices climb again. You feel a subtle shift in the air, the kind that isn't from cold wind but from economic gravity pulling everything downward. A quirky rumour floats through the crowd like a leaf in a slow breeze. Someone says that in a nearby region, a clever man started using carved wooden tokens instead of coins because the old money doesn't understand the new world. Another claims certain coins have started losing value entirely because people assume any stamped metal without food behind it is worthless. Someone even insists gold has become less useful than barley. You quietly think, that's not the worst investment logic, honestly. Historians still argue whether these price crashes were caused directly by famine pressure, by disrupted trade networks, or by widespread fear that destabilized markets faster than the actual shortages. Some experts argue that panic fueled inflation. Others claim inflation fueled panic. You imagine scholars debating in academic tones while the people in 536 lived through it with empty stomachs. At the edge of the square, a money changer sits silently behind his small wooden table, usually one of the busier stations in town, now nearly deserted. He looks down at his scales, weighing a coin, then glances up at the sky as if expecting the sun to offer economic advice. The sun, however, seems busy doing its impression of a dying candle. Your feet carry you toward a group of farmers who have gathered near a cart filled with wilted vegetables. They talk quietly about selling what little they have before it spoils. Better to earn something, one says, than nothing at all. Another mutters that next season might be worse, so he's saving whatever seeds he can. They look exhausted, shoulders sagging in identical arcs, mirror images of people trying to hold up a world that keeps slipping. You wander between the stalls. Prices for wool have gone up because sheep are eating less, producing less, and generally looking like they've lost hope in the concept of grass. Fish sellers charge more for smaller catches. Even simple tools cost extra because caravans delivering iron are thin on the roads. You stop at the pottery stall. The merchant looks up and forces a smile. Cheaper bowls today, he says. Everyone's cooking smaller meals. He says it jokingly, but his eyes don't smile. You chuckle softly anyway. Joke number 1, because sometimes humour is all anyone has. Nearby, a pair of elderly men discuss the price of lamp oil. One complains he can't afford as much now that evenings are colder and longer. The other shrugs and suggests going to bed earlier. What else is there to do, he says, not unkindly. They both laugh, though it sounds a little fragile. Toward the centre of the square, an official of some kind stands on a small wooden platform, trying to reassure the crowd that the situation is temporary and the state is monitoring grain imports. Unfortunately, the dim sun chooses that exact moment to disappear behind a thicker veil of haze, and the official's voice trails off because even he doesn't believe himself. As the day progresses, the marketplace takes on a strange new rhythm. Cautious bargaining, hesitant buying, people counting coins 3 times before parting with them. A mother pays for a small bundle of barley and lingers, looking at the merchant as if hoping he'll hand her a miracle with her change. He doesn't. He can't. You notice more subtle behavioural changes too. People weigh food in their hands longer. Neighbours exchange whispers about saving, stretching, substituting. Those with full baskets walk faster, clutch tighter. Those with empty baskets walk slower, shoulders low. At one point, a woman drops a small pouch of coin. Normally that would cause a scramble, not out of greed, but out of the simple instinct to grab resources. Today, everyone freezes. She kneels quickly, gathers the coins, and holds the pouch against her chest as if it might stop her heart from shaking. You find yourself wandering away from the marketplace, heading to the quieter outskirts of town. The air feels colder here, but the silence is easier. You sit on a low stone wall watching the grey horizon through drifting particles. Somewhere out there, famine is forming. Somewhere out there, markets are collapsing. Somewhere out there, entire communities are reorganising themselves around scarcity. And somehow, impossibly, life keeps moving. People still cook. People still trade. People still tell jokes, whisper rumours, and search for small miracles. But behind everything runs a quieter truth. The economy isn't just strained, it's bending, like wood placed under too much weight, quietly creaking before it snaps. And as you sit there, breathing in the cold, dim air, you understand that hunger doesn't always begin with empty stomachs. Sometimes it begins with numbers on a board. You make your way into the city the next day, or what you assume is the next day, because time has become slippery in this dim half-light. Cities are supposed to feel alive no matter the weather. They're supposed to buzz with noise, footsteps, merchants shouting deals, kids running between stalls, and the general soundtrack of humans piling on top of each other in a small space. But here, the city feels quieter. Not empty, just muted, as if a giant invisible hand placed a wool blanket over all the sounds. You step through the gate and immediately notice it. A thick, pale fog hugging every surface. It's not a morning mist. It's not smoke from fires. It's that strange, dry fog again. The same strange haze chroniclers described from Italy to Syria. It doesn't bead on your skin like moisture. It clings like dust. When you inhale, it feels faintly gritty, like the air has texture. Air should not have texture. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Multiple Byzantine and Mediterranean accounts mention that in 536 the sun could be seen but not felt, visible as a dim, pale sphere through a persistent fog-like veil. Some writers said the fog was so thick that even at noon it resembled twilight. Others said lamps were needed indoors all day. You look around and sure enough, shops in the city already have candles burning despite it being midday. or what should be midday. At this point, time is more of a suggestion. As you move down the main road, stones under your feet feel colder than they should. The buildings loom larger in the haze. Their outlines blur slightly, making everything look like an unfinished sketch. People walk slowly, squinting ahead as if the fog carries secrets they're trying to read. A child tugs at her mother's sleeve. "Is it smoke?" she whispers. The mother shakes her head. "Smoke smells. This doesn't." She's right. The fog has no scent, no warmth, no life. Just a silent, stubborn presence. You watch a lamplighter moving from pole to pole, lighting lamps even though the sun technically hangs above. It feels backwards, like the world is staging a rehearsal for nighttime in the middle of the day. The lamplighter nods to you with a tired shrug. "Saves me work later," he says. You give a small laugh, joke number one, but even humour seems diluted in this grey light. You walk toward a market street where normally the air would be full of spices, roasting meat and chatter. Today the smells are fainter, the voices quieter. People stand close together as they shop, not for warmth, but because the haze makes distances feel uneasy. Baskets sit half-filled. Fish lie dull-scaled on tables. Piles of grain look smaller by the week. A quirky rumour drifts from one stall to another. Someone claims the fog is caused by mountain spirits grinding giant stones in the clouds. Another says the fog is the breath of angry gods. A third insists that lighting candles near open windows keeps the fog from seeping inside. The candle sellers love this rumour and absolutely do not deny it. Historians still argue whether the dry fog was thickest in cities because of local environmental conditions or simply because urban density made atmospheric oddities more noticeable. Some say the fog was uniform worldwide. Others believe pockets of extreme haze formed where wind patterns trapped volcanic aerosols. You imagine scholars gesturing dramatically at climate models, while the people in 536 simply blinked into the gloom and hoped daily life wouldn't dissolve. You walk near a courtyard where a fountain trickles quietly. The water looks flat and dull, lacking the usual sparkle of reflected sunlight. A few thin leaves float along the surface, their colours muted to lifeless, washed-out tones. A group of pigeons perch on the rim, staring with silent suspicion into the fog as if expecting it to speak. The fog thickens near the older stone buildings. You can barely make out faces at 10 paces. The world feels like it's shrinking. A merchant pulls his wagon cautiously down the road, ringing a small bell so people will hear him before they see him. A woman nearly bumps into you and mutters an apology, brushing particles off her shawl. There's a strange psychological shift here too. People speak more softly, as though negotiating with the air. No one rushes. Rushing feels dangerous when you can't clearly see where the road dips or where a cartwheel left ruts. You pass a sweet cake seller whose normally bright pastries look like they've been drawn in charcoal. A boy buys one anyway, bites into it, and declares it tastes like fog. Everyone laughs, lightly, joke number two, the kind of brittle humour that holds communities together when everything else is fraying. A group of workers shovel dust from steps near a temple. Not heavy dust, just a thin, persistent film. By the time they finish sweeping one side, the other is coated again. One throws down his broom dramatically and says, "The sky hates us." Another pats him on the back and says, "Get in line." At a crossroads you find a crowd gathered around a public notice. An official reads aloud, his voice drifting through the fog. Citizens are advised to remain calm. Visibility may remain low for weeks. Someone shouts, "Weeks? It's been months." The official clears his throat and pretends his hearing is poor. You wander deeper into the city, past homes where windows glow faintly behind shutters. People are conserving lamp oil, but even so, they keep some light burning indoors throughout the day now. A woman tells her neighbour that she feels uneasy when the house is too dim, as if shadows have grown heavier. Her neighbour nods and confesses she sleeps with an extra candle lit, just in case the sun forgets to come back. Near a bathhouse, steam rises in thin ribbons, dissolving instantly into the fog. The workers complain that water takes longer to heat in this cold. Air? A man exiting the baths wraps himself in a robe and shivers. "Feels like winter in my bones," he says. You understand the feeling. You pause at the top of a short stairway overlooking a small square. Below, the fog swirls lazily, hugging rooftops, wrapping around pillars, softening every edge. A dog trots through the haze, stops, sniffs, then sneezes loudly enough to startle itself. A few people smile. In times like these, even a dog's sneeze counts as entertainment. As the day, or whatever passes for Daypran, proceeds, the fog refuses to lift. You watch lamps flicker in windows, watch silhouettes glide through the haze, watch the city breathe in slow, uneasy rhythm. It's beautiful in a haunting way, like walking through the faded memory of a place instead of the place itself. But beneath that beauty lies something heavier, a realization settling into everyone at once. You can adapt to darkness. You can adapt to cold, but living inside a fog that refuses to leave, that begins to change people, not just their routines, their moods, their sense of safety, their confidence in the world. And as you leave the square, the fog drifting between the buildings like a tired ghost, you feel it. The cities aren't just dimmed, they're suffocating under a sky they no longer trust. You leave the dim, fog-wrapped city behind and follow a quiet road eastward. The cold presses against your skin the whole way, a steady reminder that the strange climate isn't easing up. It's settling in, like an unwanted guest rearranging the furniture. When you finally reach the next settlement, the atmosphere feels different and not in a comforting way. There's tension here, a slow, brittle kind of tension, like a lute string wound too tight. You head toward the heart of the village and quickly realize why. A group of people is gathered beneath a faded portico listening to a traveling scholar read from a scroll. Scholars are usually met with nods, questions, maybe a polite clap. Today, though, every listener wears the same expression: tired, fearful, alert. They look as if they're waiting to be told how long the world has left on its warranty. The scholar is reading from a chronicle, not a story, not a poem, but a cold list of observations. Famine spreads beyond the capital, he says. Ships arriving with less grain than promised. Vineyards turned bitter. Markets empty. Even the emperor's table has been reduced. His voice softens on that last word. If the emperor's meals are shrinking, the common people know where they stand. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind. Byzantine scribes documented these years meticulously, recording the sudden darkness, the short summers, and the terrifying harvest failures. One chronicler even wrote that the sun was like the moon without rays, and grain yields shrank to a fraction of normal production. You picture scribes in lamplit rooms, scratching down the details of a world that felt like it was slipping through their fingers. You step closer, watching the faces around you. A woman clutches her shawl. A man shakes his head slowly, disbelief becoming habit. Children cling to their parents, even though they don't fully understand what's being described. They just recognize fear when adults can't hide it. And then, as scholars always do, this one tries to translate catastrophe into order. Hunger is not yet everywhere, he says, but it spreads. That's the kind of line that's meant to be reassuring and absolutely is not. Nearby, a man mutters, "If the capital suffers, what chance do we have?" A woman beside him replies that maybe the emperor will send aid. The man gives her a look that says he stopped believing in imperial generosity last harvest. A quirky rumour quickly follows, because where fear gathers, so do stories. Someone claims the emperor's astrologers predicted this dimming years earlier but kept it secret. Another insists the palace is stockpiling bread for a long night, foretold in ancient writings no one has actually seen. A young man rolling a cart past whispers that the imperial granaries are locked, guarded by warriors who don't talk. You're pretty sure that rumour is an exaggeration. Mostly. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine state truly foresaw food shortages, or if later chroniclers dramatised the situation to sound prophetic. Some say warning signs existed in advance. Others insist no one could have predicted a multi-year atmospheric catastrophe. You imagine scholars raising eyebrows and footnotes at each other in conferences, while the people living in 536 had no such luxury. You wander toward the poor district, where the air feels heavier not just from gloom, but from the reality of hunger already settling in. A thin boy sits on a step, scraping the inside of a clay pot for whatever remnants cling to the sides. A woman stirs a pot of watery stew while her elderly mother watches with a kind of resigned hunger. It smells like broth made from hope more than ingredients. You step into a narrow alley where two men are speaking quietly. One says he's selling tools, the other asks why. "I don't need tools," he answers. "I need grain." The second man bites his lip, unsure how to reply. You feel the heaviness of that exchange, the slow reshuffling of priorities that famine always demands. A group of elders sits beneath a cracked wooden awning, discussing the latest imperial message read aloud by the scholar. "They say relief caravans might come," one says, not sounding convinced. "And what will they bring?" another asks. "Fog? Cold?" The group chuckles in that dry, humorless way people do when laughing is easier than crying. A merchant nearby carefully measures out lentils with trembling hands. He cuts the portions smaller than usual, slicing through scarcity with practiced precision. You see customers glance at each, some worried, some angry, some resigned. A young mother counts her coins twice before handing them over. When the merchant gives her the tiny pouch of food, she closes her eyes briefly, as if absorbing the weight of it. You move toward a small bookshop where a single candle flickers in the dimness. Inside, the shopkeeper shows you a fresh copy of a local chronicle. Its newest entries detail frost in the wrong months, failed vineyards, and rumours from Constantinople that the emperor has ordered astrologers to observe the sky daily for signs of divine displeasure. The shopkeeper shakes his head. "If they're waiting for the sky to brighten," he murmurs, "they'll be waiting a long while." As you leave, you notice a thin layer of dust even inside the shop. Ash sneaking in through cracks, settling on parchment, blurring ink, smudging the edges of words. The chronicles themselves are being written beneath the fingerprints of the catastrophe they describe. Outside, night approaches, not that you can tell easily. The fog thickens slightly, and lamps flicker along the streets, their halos swallowed by haze. People walk faster as the cold sharpens, cloaks pulled close, conversations brief. In the dimming twilight, you overhear a tired voice whisper, "If the scholars are afraid, what hope do we have?" No one answers. You wander back toward the outskirts of the settlement, your breath visible in the supposed summer air. The sky above hangs like a lid, low, grey, unchanging. You feel the weight of it. The way people here must feel it every day. The chronicles are being written in real time. Hunger is no longer a distant threat. And somewhere in the Empire's marble halls, officials are whispering the question everyone here already knows. What happens when there's nothing left to ration? You wake to a sound you don't usually hear this time of year, a brittle crunch beneath your boots as you step outside. Frost. Not heavy, not glittering in a magical winter wonderland way, but a thin, stubborn layer clinging to rooftops, fence posts, and the edges of forgotten buckets. You bend down, touch it, and feel the unmistakable chill of a season that should be months away. It's the kind of frost that makes you frown and mutter, "Really?" to the sky, as if the sky might apologise. The neighbours notice it too. A woman opens her door, sees the frosted ground, and instantly retreats to grab her cloak. A shepherd taps his walking stick against the frozen soil, listening to the dull, wrong-sounding thud. A child pokes at frost with a stick and then asks, "Is winter lost?" His mother sighs and says, "Something is." A mainstream historical fact surfaces in your mind. Records from across Europe and Asia note extremely early and unusually long winters beginning in 536. Snow fell during growing seasons in some regions. Frost arrived in months usually safe for planting. Temperatures dropped sharply and stayed low for years. It wasn't a single harsh winter, it was a string of them, each colder than the last. You walk down the lane, your breath visible in the air again. It shouldn't be. Not now, not like this. You pull your cloak tighter as you pass a farmer examining the ground around his crops. He shakes his head, running his hand over frost-burned leaves. "Could have sworn I heard the soil cracking last night," he says. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Or maybe it was my back. Hard to tell these days. A quirky rumour drifts through the chilly morning air. Apparently some villagers believe the frost is not real frost at all, but a sign that the earth is breathing out cold, trying to protect itself. Another rumour claims that winter spirits are confused and have shown up early, dragging their cold blankets behind them. Someone even insists that the dim sun has misplaced its warmth, and that if people pray facing the right direction, they can coax it back. You resist the urge to ask what the correct direction is. Historians still argue whether the prolonged cold spells were caused primarily by volcanic aerosols reflecting sunlight, or by disruptions to ocean currents triggered by the sudden temperature drop. Some experts say atmospheric dimming cooled the land directly, others suggest cascading environmental effects, colder oceans, altered weather patterns, extended winters. You imagine academics gesturing at charts while the people in 536 just stepped outside and said, "Yep, still freezing." You walk toward the forest on the outskirts of the settlement. Trees that should be lush are already losing leaves. Not the golden flutter of autumn, just brown, withered leaves dropping early, as though the trees decided they couldn't be bothered this year. A woodcutter chops logs nearby, each crack of wood echoing sharply in the cold air. He pauses to rub his hands, breath steaming. "Feels like winter woke up early and won't go back to bed," he mutters. Along the forest path you spot a stream where thin sheets of ice cling to the edges. Ice, in what should be warm months. You crouch down, run your fingers across the fragile surface and watch it shiver. The water beneath moves sluggishly, as if reluctant to flow. A frog sits on a rock, blinking with the same energy you have before your morning coffee, confused, cold, and slightly offended. By midday, or something like midday, you return to the fields. Farmers gather near a group of wilted plants, discussing whether to replant anything. Most agree it's pointless. Some shake their heads slowly. One man insists he'll plant again anyway because hope is cheaper than grain. You admire his determination, even if reality disagrees. You hear talk about winter supplies. Not winter in the distant future. Winter soon. Winter early. Winter with nothing to eat. People plan repairs to roofs and walls. Repairs they normally wouldn't start until months later. Men inspect wood piles. Women check blankets. A boy carries an armful of kindling with the seriousness of a soldier carrying weapons. Everyone knows what early cold means. Shorter growing seasons, weaker harvests next year, livestock struggling, illness spreading, hunger deepening. Cold is an accelerant to every fear, every shortage, every whispered worry. You pass a family repairing their home. The father nails thick hides over the cracks in the walls. The mother checks the hearth. A little girl stands outside puzzling over the frost. "If the cold keeps coming early," she says, "will the warm ever come back at all?" Her mother hears her and quickly ushers her inside as if the question itself is dangerous. Near the granary you find people checking their stores yet again, counting sacks, recounting them, running their hands over the grain as though they might squeeze more out of it by touch alone. A man sighs and admits he's started watering down his porridge to make it last. Another says he's begun sleeping earlier because being awake uses too much hunger. You weren't prepared for that one. Even animals sense the shift. Chickens huddle together for warmth. Dogs curl nearer to fires. Cows shift uneasily in their pens, twitching their ears at every breeze. You stroke one cow's neck. She leans into the touch, warm and solid. You pretend you don't see her ribs faintly through her coat. By evening the frost melts into half-soggy mud, but the cold never truly lifts. It lingers, a quiet warning that tomorrow might bring the same or worse. People move through the streets with a slow resignation, carrying bundles of wood, tightening cloaks, checking on elderly neighbours. At the well, two women talk softly. What if this is the new normal? A year like this can't stay. What if it can? Silence. A long, heavy silence. You head back toward your lodging, passing houses where thin trails of smoke escape chimneys. The smoke rises only a little before blending into the fog, absorbed by the dim, indifferent sky. As you lie down, you realize something unsettling. You're no longer waiting for the cold season. You're already living in it. The world is stuck in a half-winter, too cold to grow food, too warm to hibernate through, trapped in a limbo that steals from every season at once. And as frost creeps into yet another day that shouldn't be cold, you feel it. This isn't just a long winter. This is a world slipping out of rhythm, and you're standing in the first quiet tremors of a global chill that refuses to end. You wake to a stillness that makes your skin prickle, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the world is holding its breath. It's colder today, colder than yesterday, and you can feel it before you even get out of bed. When you finally step outside, the air bites at your cheeks. The sky, that dull grey lid pressed over everything, feels lower than ever. People move slower. Voices sound thinner. Even dogs look uneasy. You've seen hints of hunger everywhere these past months. Smaller meals, hoarded grain, thin livestock. But today you notice something else creeping in behind the hunger. Something darker and far more dangerous. A cough echoing from inside a house. Then another. Then another. At first it's just background noise, the way people clear throats in cold air. But something about the rhythm tells you it's more than that. A man steps out of his home, wrapped tightly in a cloak. He leans against the doorframe, dizzy, and wipes his mouth with the back of his hand. When he pulls it away, he stares at it too long. You don't see the mark, but you recognize the expression. That sinking realization when a simple illness in a fragile year becomes something much worse. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. After the dimming of 536 and the years of cold and famine that followed, the world was struck by the infamous Justinianic plague around 541 and 542, the first major bubonic plague outbreak on record. Weakened populations, hungry communities, stressed immune systems, and collapsing infrastructure created the perfect storm for disease to spread. You're not in 541 yet, but you can feel the early edges forming here, in 536, where weakened bodies and cold homes are already making people vulnerable. Illness spreads faster in underfed communities, faster in cold air, faster when people share tight spaces to conserve warmth. A quirky rumour drifts through the village like a nervous bird. Some say coughing is caused by cold spirits slipping into the lungs at night. Another insists the Earth's recent dimming has allowed night air to grow stronger and invade the body. One man even claims a healer told him to sleep sitting up because lying flat invites the sickness. You're not sure where that advice came from, but the healer would make a great motivational poster. You walk toward the small clinic, though clinic is generous. It's just a room with herbs hanging from the ceiling, blankets folded neatly, and a harried-looking woman boiling water over a low flame. A line of people stands outside, each carrying symptoms like hidden burdens. A child sniffles into her mother's shawl. An elderly man leans heavily on a cane, his breath short. A young woman rubs at her throat with trembling fingers. As you pass, you hear the healer mutter, "I can treat the cough. I cannot treat the winter." Her words settle into the air like frost. Historians still argue whether disease was already circulating, quietly before the major outbreak, or whether later chroniclers retroactively connected the dots. But they all agree on this. Periods of famine and climate stress always open the door to illness, and illness rarely knocks politely. You head toward the market square where fewer stalls are open today. A butcher stands alone behind his counter, wiping a knife slowly, rhythmically. More a nervous habit than work. He looks up and tells you fewer people are coming out. Cold gets into their bones, he says, then sickness follows. Bread sellers wrap scarves around their faces not only for warmth, but because they've begun to fear the air itself. A few people keep distance between one another, not officially, not systematically, but instinctively. It's subtle, but you can see it. A slow retreat from closeness. You pass a group of women drawing water from the well. One coughs into her sleeve. The others step back, then pretend they didn't. A few months ago, that would have been impolite. Now it's survival instinct humming quietly beneath social norms. Near the carpenter's shop, two men talk in hushed tones. He's been sick 3 days. Has he eaten? No one has eaten properly. Should we send for the priest? He's already visited twice this week. You keep walking, the conversations blending into a steady undercurrent of fear. The cold seems deeper today, sinking through wool and skin and bone alike. You catch sight of a woman lighting incense inside her doorway, waving the smoke around her home to chase out the sickness. It smells warm and comforting, but you know it won't be enough. A child plays with a stick near the well, drawing lines in the cold dirt. His father rushes over, snatches him up, muttering, "Not near the sick." You glance around. The sickness is everywhere and nowhere, scattered across doorways and alleys like invisible dust. At the edge of the settlement, you meet an old scholar sitting on a stone, breathing heavily. He tells you that illness always follows hardship. When the stomach is empty and the nights are cold, he says, death listens more closely, and it learns our names faster. You stand with him as he points toward the horizon. If the world stays dim, he says, if the cold stays, you'll see plagues travel faster than traders. His face is weary, his hands shake. You don't know whether from cold or fear. The sun never truly rises today, just hovers behind its haze like a dying ember. Shadows disappear. The chill deepens. By evening, the coughing has spread further. More than before, faster than before. The healer's fire burns bright but small, and the line at her door stretches longer. You watch as candles light up windows, not in celebration, not in comfort, but because the darkness inside mirrors the darkness outside, and no one knows which one is safer. You lie awake that night listening to the distant coughs echo through the settlement, soft at first, then harsher, then more frequent. They rise and fall like an eerie tide, not loud enough to panic you, but steady enough to haunt you. You know what's coming, even if no one else does yet, even if they're still telling themselves it's just a cold spell, just a bad season, just bad luck. But the truth settles over you like frost. When people are weak, illness walks faster. When food is scarce, fever burns hotter. When homes are cold, breath carries farther. The famine has cracked the door open. Now the sickness is stepping through. You wake the next morning with a strange feeling. Not dread exactly, but that restless awareness humans get when the world is hiding something just out of reach. The sky hangs low again, grey and non-committal, the same washed-out dome you've gotten far too familiar with. But today, instead of heading to the fields or the market, people drift toward the gathering hall. There's a rumour circulating, not of famine or sickness this time, but of answers, or at least attempts at answers. Inside the hall, several scholars, travellers, and scribes have gathered around a long table cluttered with wax tablets, old scrolls, charcoal sketches and maps. They look exhausted, sleep-deprived in that specific academic way, but they're energised too, the way people get when they're inches away from explaining something enormous. You slip into the crowd as a scholar with a pointed beard taps a map spread out before him. "Look at the sky," he says, gesturing vaguely upward, "and look at the timing. Something massive happened. Not here, but far away. Something that blotted the sun." A mainstream historical fact floats through your thoughts. Modern scientists studying ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica found abrupt spikes in volcanic sulfur around the year 536, pointing to one or more huge eruptions. Some say Iceland, some say North America. Others suggest an equatorial volcano that blasted ash so high it reached the stratosphere. The data is real, but pinning down the exact volcano, a mystery still being unravelled centuries later. The scholar continues, "We've compared accounts, from Constantinople, from the far west, from the east, from travellers who saw the same dim sun. All describe a veiling of the sky, a dry fog, a cooling of the earth." He pauses. "These are the fingerprints of a volcanic winter." A murmur ripples through the room, but then another scholar, younger, with ink-stained fingers, stands. "A single volcano?" she asks skeptically. "Or several? Evidence suggests the dimming persisted longer than one eruption should allow. Perhaps multiple blasts, one after another, feeding the skies with ash." She taps a tablet. "There are records of fires in the Far East, of strange red suns, of cold summers, clusters of signs. Historians still argue whether the catastrophe of 536 came from one enormous eruption or a deadly chain reaction, a main event followed by secondary eruptions that kept the sky choked for years. You watch the scholars circle this debate like dancers with too many feet. A third scholar slams a fist lightly on the table, not angry, just passionately academic. "The volcano was in the north," he insists. "Ice records show northern signatures. The telltale chemical traces align with Icelandic basalt." The first scholar rolls his eyes so hard you can hear it. "Always Iceland with you," he mutters. A quirky rumour surfaces from the back of the hall. Someone whispers that the world tree itself shook, sending dust from its branches across the sky. Another claims a mountain spirit shattered its own peak in anger. Someone else swears the sun offended a celestial being, and this dimming is punishment. The rumours swirl with the same energy as the scholarship, each seeking meaning in a sky that refuses to explain itself. You move closer as the scholars unfurl a rough sketch, showing the possible spread of atmospheric ash. They point to hypothetical wind routes, trying to reconstruct the invisible, how microscopic particles might have travelled, circling the world, blocking sunlight, cooling oceans, collapsing seasons. One scholar marks a point on the map. If the eruption was here, he theorizes, the ash would have risen high enough to be carried globally. That would explain the uniform dimming, the sun seen like the moon, the cold summers, the fog that wasn't fog. Another scholar counters, but the chronicles from the east mention a blood-red sun at dawn, a signature of tropical eruptions. The argument begins again, sharp but respectful, all sharp quills and sharper minds. The crowd listens, trying to stitch these possibilities into a single story. You catch fragments. The ash would stay for months. Ground temperatures dropped dramatically. Crop failures aren't just from cold, but from light starvation. Oceans cooling disrupted weather patterns. The jet stream shifted. You blink, reminded that people in 536 didn't know these terms, but they felt their effects with every step, every breath. The scholars eventually shift from theories to accounts. A scribe reads from a chronicle describing a sun, blue-white and powerless. Another recounts tales of snow falling in midsummer. Another mentions a witness who said the sky glowed faintly at night, possibly from volcanic particles scattering light. Then, a particularly tired scholar rubs his eyes and says, "Perhaps the source doesn't matter." Everyone turns to him in surprise. He continues quietly, "What matters is understanding how long this will last, and how to survive it." Silence fills the hall, heavy, honest. He points to a tablet showing the timeline of dimming. "If this is volcanic," he says, "the skies may remain affected for at least a year, possibly longer if more. Eruptions follow." The words land like cold stones. A woman in the crowd asks, "Will the sun brighten again?" The scholar hesitates. "Yes," he says finally. "It must, but not soon." You feel the room shift. People aren't panicking, not loudly, but you sense the sinking in their chests. Hope is a delicate thing in a darkened world. The scholars resume debating, softer now. They speak of eruptions they'll never witness, mountains they'll never reach, climate mechanisms they don't fully understand. But their drive to explain is fierce. It's how humans fight the unknown, with words, ideas, theories, ink. You step back from the crowd, watching the debate from the doorway. The fog outside presses against the windows. The cold creeps deeper, but inside minds are burning brightly, even as the sun refuses to. And you realize something. The sky may be dark, the cold unyielding, the world trembling, but people are still trying to make sense of it, to name it, measure it, map it, understand it. Even if the cause remains unclear, even if the scholars argue for years, even if the volcano that changed the world stays hidden forever under ash and ice. This is humanity's response to disaster. When the world goes dark, we light a fire, even if it's just in our minds. You leave the hall of arguing scholars behind, stepping once again into the cold, dim light that has become the world's new normal. The air bites lightly at your cheeks, and the sky looks like it hasn't slept in months. You walk toward the forest, not for warmth, not for comfort, but because you overheard someone mention an old grove where the trees seem to remember things. It's a poetic way to talk about tree rings, though no one here knows the term. They just know the trees have stories carved into them whether anyone listens or not. You reach the grove slowly, your boots crunching over brittle leaves that have fallen far too early. The forest feels quieter than usual, as if the dim world has seeped into its roots. You place your hand on a thick, ancient trunk, wide enough that it would take several of you holding hands to encircle it. The bark is cold and rough beneath your palm. A mainstream historical fact rises in your thoughts. Modern scientists studying tree rings, dendrochronologists if you want the fancy word, found that the year 536 shows a sharp, unmistakable signature. A global growth slowdown. Narrow rings, sometimes dramatically thin, appear in trees from Scandinavia to North America to China. The trees grew slowly because the world grew cold and dark. They recorded the atmospheric catastrophe in their bodies more faithfully than any human scribe. You look closer at the trunk, feeling the faint ridges beneath your fingertips. This tree, older than the oldest storyteller in town, carries the memory of every harsh year it has endured. If you could peel it open, which the tree would absolutely not appreciate, you'd see a season-long whisper carved into its ring. 536 was not a normal year. You wander deeper into the grove where a woodcutter is sharpening his axe. His breath puffs white in the air. He nods at you, then gestures to a log beside him. "Strange wood this season," he says, tapping it with the flat of his blade. "Feels tighter. Rings are squeezed close. Never seen it quite like this." He frowns, then adds, "Trees barely grew. They're as confused as we are." You kneel beside the log and sure enough, the rings look unusually narrow. Even without scientific terms, you can see it. The trees have been starving for sunlight. They grew like someone had turned the world's brightness down to 1%. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind. Some medieval traditions claim that trees could sigh during hard years, their leaves trembling more loudly in the wind. Others insisted that trees could sense omens, growing differently when the world was in danger. It's not accurate in a scientific sense, but standing here among these quiet giants, feeling the cold and the silence, you can understand why people believed it. These trees feel like witnesses, silent, ancient, patient. A boy collecting fallen branches nearby overhears the woodcutter and asks, "Is the forest sick too?" The woodcutter pauses, then shrugs. "Maybe just tired," he says. The boy nods solemnly, then gathers another handful of twigs like he's helping to cheer up a sad friend. Historians still argue whether the tree ring anomalies of 536 came from reduced sunlight alone, or if volcanic chemicals changed rainfall patterns, drying some regions and overwatering others. Was it the cold, the darkness, the disrupted climate, or the combination of all three? Experts debate these factors with intense precision. The trees, of course, don't care about the debate. They simply grew less and told the truth in wood. You wander further in, the ground soft beneath you despite the chill. The grove opens into a clearing where an elderly man sits on a stump, carving a piece of wood slowly and thoughtfully. He glances up. "Looking for answers?" he asks. You raise an eyebrow. He smiles. "People come here lately trying to make sense of the world. They think the old trees know something." "Do they?" you ask. The carver shrugs. "They know what they know. Years with good rain, years with bad, years with fire, years with cold." He pauses, his knife still. "This year, they grew thin." He taps the wood. "Very thin." You sit beside him, watching his slow, deliberate movements. The forest feels heavier here, as if the air itself remembers how bright sunlight used to be. You listen to the occasional creak of branches, not from wind, but from cold, from strain, from a world running on low power. After a while, you move toward a fallen tree that split cleanly in a storm earlier this season. The trunk faces upward, rings exposed like an open book. You count the lines, dozens, maybe a century's worth. Then you notice it, a narrow ring near the outer edge, so thin it looks like a scratch, a hesitant mark. That's 536, the year the sky dimmed, the world chilled, the harvest collapsed. It's strange seeing it preserved physically. It's like stumbling across a diary entry written by the earth itself. As you stand, a breeze rustles the leaves overhead, dry, brittle, ready to fall. They sound louder than usual, like paper sheets scraping against one another. The forest doesn't feel alive the way forests usually do. It feels paused, waiting, unsure. You continue walking until you reach the forest's edge. A group of villagers stands near a cluster of trees with string and charcoal marking their bark. You ask what they're doing, and one woman replies, "We're counting." She taps a mark. "We want to know how the trees grew before all this." Her voice trails off. Someone else adds, "If we understand what they show, maybe we can prepare." They're trying to read the natural world for clues, and honestly, it's not a bad instinct. As the dim afternoon leans toward evening, the cold deepens. You touch one last tree, feeling the rough texture, the solidness, the quiet endurance. These trees have lived through storms, droughts, harsh winters, invasions, fires, and now, whatever strange catastrophe the world is stumbling through, they've recorded it all without judgment, without panic. And yet, even they struggled this year. Even they flinched. Even they bore scars. As you step back into the open, a quiet realization settles over you. Humans wrote chronicles, scholars argued theories, merchants carried rumors, but the trees simply told the truth. And their truth is this. Something happened in 536 that dimmed the sun, chilled the earth, and left marks deep enough to be visible centuries later. In rings of wood, thin as whispers yet loud enough to echo across time. You leave the whispering forest behind and head toward the hills. Not because you're looking for warmth, good luck with that, but because travellers mentioned an ice pit nearby. At first, it sounded like a local rumour, one of those half-wrong tales that start when someone misinterprets nature. But the more you listened, the more you realised they weren't talking about a pit of ice. They were talking about deep ice, ancient ice, the kind that forms in glaciers, caves, and high, cold places where time is stored in frozen layers like pages in a book. You climb the narrow path, cold wind trailing your steps, until the land drops slowly into a depression where pale frost clings to stone like a stubborn guest. The ground crunches underfoot, and there, nestled between rock walls, lies a long, narrow sheet of ice. Not fresh frost, not frozen rain. This is old ice, hard, layered, dense. You crouch down and place your fingertips against it. It's so cold it almost burns. A mainstream historical fact rises in your mind. Modern scientists study ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica to understand ancient climates. And when they drilled into layers marked with the year 536, they found something dramatic. Sharp spikes in volcanic sulfur, chemical signatures of eruptions, little frozen fingerprints of catastrophe. This ice remembers everything the sky forgot to explain. You stare at the frozen surface, imagining the layers stacked below. Year after year after year, each season preserved, each storm recorded, each quiet snowfall trapped. Somewhere deep in an ice sheet like this lies the exact moment the world dimmed. A fine layer of ash and sulfate, thin but unmistakable. The frozen memory of the eruption, or eruptions, that rewrote the weather for half a decade. You step carefully along the edge as a local hunter approaches, carrying a walking stick and wearing a fur-lined cloak. "Strange year for the ice," he says. "Hasn't melted like it should." He taps the frozen sheet. Even in summer it stays thick, like it's holding on to something. You glance at him. Holding on to what? He shrugs. Ask the sky. A quirky rumour drifts into your mind. People centuries ago believed ice was the Earth's way of storing cold so it could release it later. Some said glaciers were sleeping dragons, their icy breath escaping whenever they shifted. Others insisted strange rocks found inside ice belonged to fallen stars. You can imagine someone pointing to volcanic ash trapped in an ice layer and saying, "A piece of the heavens, proof something angered the sky." You walk further to a narrow crevice where the ice deepens into a blue-tinted pool. The colour is striking. Layers condense so tightly that time itself seems trapped in vertical stripes. You run your hand over a smooth bulge of frost and imagine scientists millennia later extracting cores from places like this, examining trapped air bubbles, analysing particulates, reconstructing the catastrophe with math, chemistry, radiocarbon dates and lasers. Historians still argue about exactly which volcano caused the event recorded in this ice. Was it Iceland, Alaska, Central America, a tropical super-eruption? The evidence points in several directions, like a mystery novel with too many suspects. And each new ice core taken in modern times complicates the story further, suggesting possibly multiple eruptions layered one after the other in a terrible atmospheric chain reaction. You climb onto a low boulder and sit, letting the cold seep through your cloak as the wind brushes past. Frost glitters faintly on the rocky edges. The air feels thinner here, crisp, sharp, and painfully clear. In the dim sky overhead, the pale sun hangs like a smudged coin. Even up here, above the haze, the light is weak. A small group arrives behind you. 2 curious townsfolk and a travelling monk who heard rumours of eternal ice. They approach cautiously, peering at the frozen pool. The monk kneels, tracing a pattern on the ice with one finger. "The world keeps its secrets," he murmurs, "in places colder than death." "Is it dangerous?" one of the townsfolk asks. "Everything is dangerous," the monk replies softly. "Especially that which does not melt." You can't help but smile, joke number 1, because monks have a flair for dramatic phrasing, but he's not wrong. This ice is less a pond and more a timeline. Every layer is a year, every year is a memory. And deep inside it lies the story no one in 536 can yet prove, that the sky dimmed because the earth erupted. A gust of wind sweeps across the depression, blowing thin drifts of snow dust along the surface. You watch the flakes skitter across the ice like tiny messengers, carrying secrets to anyone willing to listen. As you follow the hunter back up the path, he says, "Animals stay higher up this year. Maybe they know something." You nod. Animals often sense shifts long before humans admit them, and indeed, you catch sight of a lone deer standing between frosted branches, its breath curling in the air. It stares at you for a long moment before bounding away, hooves thudding softly. By the time you reach the ridge again, the dim afternoon has begun its slow fade into a dim evening, indistinguishable except for the slight temperature drop. You look back at the ice pit one more time, tiny against the vast grey landscape. It looks like an eye, frozen wide, watching the sky that blinded it centuries ago. And then a thought slides into your mind, quiet and heavy. The people of 536 have no way of knowing that one day, long after their bones turn to dust, scientists will drill deep into ice sheets and find physical proof of their suffering. Neither kings nor emperors preserved this knowledge. The ice did, not with ink, not with parchment, but with layers, thin, cold, honest. As you descend the ridge, your steps slow, your breath fogging. In the fading light you understand. The sky may hide its secrets, but the earth remembers everything. You start to notice something new in the stories people tell, not just about crops and cold and coughs, but about kings, rumours of rulers who suddenly seem less certain, courts that suddenly feel more nervous, and borders that suddenly look more fragile. It hits you slowly. The dim sky isn't just messing with harvests and moods, it's messing with kingdoms. You follow a dusty road that once tied together pieces of an impressive empire, the kind of realm whose rulers believed they could bend history with a decree. But even empires can't legislate the sun back to full brightness, and you can feel that truth in the uneasy movement of soldiers, in the tightened expressions of tax collectors, in the quiet grumbling of villagers who now pay more but get less. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. The year 536 marks the beginning of what some researchers call the Late Antique Little Ice Age, a period of unusual cooling that lasted roughly a century. During and after this time, the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire pushed through brutal wars, famines, and soon enough, plague. Across the way, rival powers like the Sasanian Persians were strained too. In the far north, societies in Scandinavia showed signs of disruption, even population decline, right after this climatic punch to the face. You pass a dusty milestone stone half buried, once proudly declaring the authority of a distant emperor. Someone has scratched a crude face on it, tongue sticking out. You don't know if that's political commentary or just bored vandalism, but given the times, it might be both. In a roadside inn, you listen to travellers trade bigger picture worries. One man in a frayed cloak says, "The emperor in the great city wages wars while the sky itself turns against him." Another shakes his head and replies, "What else can rulers do but keep marching? If they stop, people notice the hunger." It's a slightly depressing management strategy, but you see the logic. A quirky tidbit reaches you over a bowl of thin stew. Someone claims a local lord has started consulting astrologers twice as often now, desperate for good omens. Another swears that in one royal court, the official sun priest changed his ceremonial robe colour from gold to grey to better match reality. If true, that's either morbid humour or ruthless brand consistency. You travel toward a larger town and arrive just in time to catch a herald reading an announcement in the central square. His voice echoes against stone walls, new taxes to support military campaigns, grain requisitions for the safety of the realm, and stricter penalties for smuggling. The crowd listens with blank faces. People don't boo, they don't cheer, they just breathe a little faster. You can almost hear them doing mental math with their cupboards. Historians still argue whether the climate shock of 536 directly toppled specific kingdoms or simply made already fragile structures crack faster. Some argue that weakened harvests and disease hollowed out the manpower and finances of empires, making wars unwinnable and revolts more likely. Others caution that politics, ideology, and plain old bad decisions played equal roles. The debate is ongoing, a long academic tug-of-war over how much blame belongs to the sky. You wander through the streets and notice how power looks different in bad years. Guards wear their armour a little looser, as if they've lost weight. Banners hang but look faded in the dim light. Courtiers ride past with carefully neutral expressions, the kind people wear when they're not sure if their jobs will exist in 5 years. Later, as you pass a small shrine, you overhear two old men talking about the old empire in the west, the one that had already fractured into pieces before 536, leaving behind a patchwork of smaller kingdoms. They say the dimming has turned some of those lands into ghost villages, one whispers. Fields empty, mansions abandoned. The other nods slowly. When the centre falls apart, the edges don't always survive. It's not exactly a motivational quote. As the day goes on, you follow a road used by tax caravans bringing grain from countryside to city. The convoy you pass isn't full. The wagons rattle half empty, horses thin, drivers silent. One mutters, "We can't squeeze grain from stone." Another answers, "We aren't squeezing stone, we're squeezing people." That's not better. You reach a hillside overlooking a fortified town, walls intact, watchtowers staffed, banners still flying. On paper, it looks strong. In reality, you see signs of strain, repair work left half-finished, fewer guards on the parapets, smoke rising from only a few chimneys instead of many. Strength, you realise, isn't just about walls, it's about how much pressure a system can take before it starts to bend and creak. Inside the town, a council meets. You don't go in, but you hear enough from outside, talk of cutting stipends, delaying building projects, tightening grain control, negotiating uneasy truces with neighbouring lords. Peace is cheaper than war, especially when feeding soldiers is suddenly a challenge. You catch one phrase that stays with you. We must make the realm look strong even if it is not. PR, but make it 6th century. In a tavern corner, a bard sings a subdued song about kings losing favour with the gods because the sun refuses to shine. People listen quietly, some nodding, some frowning. It's one of those songs that sounds like myth but feels like news. Someone jokes weakly that if the gods are punishing anyone, they're being very thorough about it. Whole empire's worth of thorough. You overhear a younger man mutter, "If the lords can't keep us fed, what good are their crowns?" That's the sort of question that gets history, moving slowly at first, then all at once. You notice a few older folks shoot him warning looks, but no one actually disagrees. Power, you realise, depends on predictable seasons, reliable harvests, and the illusion, or reality, that rulers can protect their people from chaos. In 536, that illusion is cracking. You can feel it in court whispers, border tensions, in the way local leaders cling harder to rituals and symbols because the weather has stopped obeying them. As the dim afternoon slides into an even dimmer evening, you stand on the town wall and look out over the pale landscape. Villages dot the horizon, small and fragile under the low grey sky. Somewhere beyond, rival kingdoms strain with the same shortages, the same cold, the same mysterious ash-choked atmosphere. No one is immune. Empires don't explode immediately when the climate shifts. They fray, they hesitate, they make desperate decisions. They overreach or pull back too far. They send out tax collectors and get back empty roads. They raise armies and find fewer healthy men to enlist. They mint coins that buy less food each year. And as you stand there, the wind numbing your fingers, you understand. The year 536 isn't just miserable for farmers and shopkeepers. It's a stress test for entire political systems. Some will bend and bounce back. Others will buckle and break. But every throne, from the smallest chieftain's stool to the grandest imperial seat, now rests on ground that's colder, poorer, and more unstable than before. The sky changed. And whether kings like it or not, their kingdoms are changing with it. You leave the murmuring towns and strained courts behind, stepping onto a quieter road, the kind that threads through farmland, woodlands, and little clusters of houses where no scholar's quill reaches and no emperor's decree ever really lands. This is where most people live. Not in palaces, not in councils, not in echoing halls, but in cottages, barns, cramped workshops, smoky kitchens. And here, the year 536 feels different. Not in the dramatic, empires are trembling way, but in the steady, grinding, intimate way that reshapes daily life. You walk past a cluster of homes where laundry hangs limply between poles. Even the clothes look tired. Children shuffle outside in oversized cloaks, rubbing sleep from their eyes because the dim mornings feel like late nights. One little girl tugs at your sleeve and asks, "Is it still breakfast if the sky looks like bedtime?" Her mother calls her back before you can answer. In the nearby courtyard, a potter kneads clay with stiff fingers, breath hissing through his teeth. "The clay dries wrong now," he mutters, to no one in particular. "Air's too cold. Pieces crack before they fire." He lifts a small bowl and sighs. It has split cleanly along the rim. You can tell he's losing more work than he's selling. A mainstream historical fact surfaces in your thoughts. Records from this time show how trades dependent on weather struggled. Salt makers suffered from reduced evaporation. Potteries failed because cold slowed drying. Metalworkers needed more fuel to maintain heat. Bakers dealt with dough that rose poorly. The cold dimming seeped into every craft, every task, every routine. You move through an alley where women scrub clothes in buckets of icy water. One winces, pulling her hands out every few seconds to warm them beneath her armpits. "Water shouldn't hurt," she mutters. "Not in this season." Her friend nods, rubbing her own hands raw. They wring out the clothes, but the fabric doesn't steam like it should. The air steals the warmth immediately. Nearby, a group of men repair a roof. They hammer without enthusiasm, hands trembling from the cold. One jokes half-heartedly that the sky's punishing them for not working harder last summer. Another says, "If the sun wants me to work harder, it can show up properly." Joke number one, carved out of exhaustion. You walk toward an open field where a shepherd is doing head counts of increasingly thin sheep. They huddle together, noses buried in wool, trying to preserve warmth. "Even the animals feel wrong," he says. "They're restless, keeping close, eating less because there's less to eat." A lamb nuzzles your hand. Its ribs are faintly visible. You scratch behind its ear because it's the only thing you can offer. A quirky rumour floats from a nearby cluster of houses. People say animals have begun acting strangely at night, wandering in circles, bleating at nothing, staring at the sky as if waiting for it to change. One woman insists she saw her chickens refuse to roost until the second candle mark. "They don't trust the light anymore," she whispers. You can't blame them. You continue along a narrow dirt road where people have left small piles of stones marking what they call sun-watching points. They stand there occasionally, just to squint at the pale sky, as if checking whether the world is still dim. One man stands there now, staring upward with his hands on his hips. "It's lighter today," he says, sounding hopeful. You look up. It is absolutely not lighter today. But hope doesn't need accuracy. Historians still argue how ordinary people interpreted the atmospheric collapse. Some say they believed it was divine judgment. Others think many understood it as natural but mysterious. Others propose that people simply endured it day by day, adjusting routines, lowering expectations, and waiting for a brightness that didn't come. You step into a small bakery where the air is warm but the mood is not. The baker opens his oven to reveal bread that rose only halfway. "I swear the dough's as confused as the sky," he mutters. "One day it rises too fast, the next it hardly moves." He slices a loaf. It's dense, heavy, a brick pretending to be bread. He hands you a piece. "Still edible," he says. You take a bite. It tastes like slightly sour determination. Outside, you pass a row of cottages where smoke curls weakly from chimneys. People lean over small fires, roasting what little they have. A young couple shares a bowl of watery stew, taking tiny spoonfuls, pretending they're full. A grandmother mends a cloak with trembling fingers, muttering that she should have saved her thicker wool for this strange half-winter. A baby cries softly, not the strong, angry cry of a well-fed child, but a thin, tired wail. You keep walking. A carpenter's apprentice stands outside his workshop, rubbing sawdust between his palms. "The wood's different," he says. "Cold makes it brittle. Trees don't grow right. Nothing feels right." You can hear the strain in his voice, not fear exactly, but the discomfort of a world that has shifted without warning. You pass a woman tending to a small herb patch that looks like it's given up on existence. She kneels, touching each stem as if apologizing to it. "My mother taught me to grow these," she says softly. "This year they won't listen." Her hands linger on a wilted leaf. "Plants know things," she adds, "sometimes more than we do." Even the way people move has changed. Slower, more deliberate, conserving energy the way they conserve food. You see fewer loud arguments, fewer celebrations, fewer children running freely. Everyone seems aware of the sky, constantly glancing upward as if waiting for some sign of improvement, for warmth, for brightness, for anything. In the late afternoon, though it could just as easily be morning, you walk near the river where villagers fill buckets. The water is colder than usual, biting through cloth bags and chilling fingers instantly. A woman mutters, "Feels like the river's turning to ice from the inside." She laughs softly at her own exaggeration, joke number 2, then shivers. The mood of everyday life is heavy, but it isn't hopeless, not completely. You see small acts of resilience everywhere. Neighbours sharing firewood, mothers teaching children how to stretch meals creatively, men repairing tools instead of replacing them, people gathering for warmth in a communal hall lit by 5 candles instead of 10, and even under the dim sky, a few children play. They chase each other through the fog, giggling as they pretend to be spirits of the cold. One of them stops and declares dramatically, "I command the sun to come out." The sky does not respond, but the other children cheer anyway, which feels like a victory of its own kind. As you finally head back to your lodging, a soft, cold breeze follows you. The world feels heavier than usual, but also strangely connected. Everyone living through the same dimness, the same cold, the same strange shrunken days. Empires are straining, crops are failing, illness is rising. But here, in the quiet corners of the world, people face the darkness with small fires, small jokes, small hopes. Their lives are dim, yes, but not extinguished. And you realize, history books remember kings, plagues, and volcanic eruptions. But the real story of 536 lives here, in the kitchens, fields, workshops, and hearths, where ordinary people keep moving through the gloom, one cold, quiet day at a time. You wake with a start, not because of any noise, but because for the first time in months the air feels different. Not warm, definitely not bright, but softer somehow. You touch the wall beside your bed and notice the chill isn't biting your fingertips quite as sharply. When you step outside, the dim sky is still dim, but it carries a faint hint, just a hint, of the colour it used to have. Like someone added one drop of brightness back into the world's paint bucket. A neighbour is already outside, staring upward with narrowed eyes. "Looks lighter," he says. It isn't. Not really. But you nod anyway. Hope often begins as an illusion. The road crunches beneath your boots as you walk, but today the frost seems thinner. The breath in front of you dissolves more quickly. The wind still cuts, but not as deeply. And as you head toward the fields, something remarkable happens. A bird chirps. Just once. Just a single note. But after months of eerie quiet, that tiny sound feels like a full orchestra warming up. A mainstream historical fact rises. In the late 530s and early 540s, temperatures began to rise slowly, painfully slowly, after the volcanic dimming. Tree ring data shows a gradual recovery, and chroniclers mention harvests improving in some regions, even if only slightly. Not a complete turnaround, not the return of normal, but progress. A heartbeat. You walk toward a field you've visited many times in the past year. Last time you saw it, the soil looked exhausted, scarred by frost, littered with half-failed crops that seemed more symbolic than edible. Today, though, the field looks less hopeless. There are small patches of green, faint sprouts where seeds dared to try again, thin, fragile, but alive. Farmers stand around the field murmuring to each other. One kneels, touches a sprout, and smiles for the first time you've seen in ages. "Look at this bold little fool," he says, "trying to grow in a broken world." Another farmer laughs, a real laugh, not the tired kind, and adds, "Maybe the world's trying to unbreak itself." A quirky rumour floats across the farmland. Someone claims the sun is apologising and slowly returning to full strength. Another insists the sky spirits have finished arguing and agreed to let light through again. Someone else whispers that the dimming was a test, and that people have finally passed. Is any of it true? Absolutely not. Does any of it matter? Also, no. Rumours of hope spread faster than rumours of doom. You continue walking and realise something subtle. People are moving slightly faster. Their steps have more spring. Conversations carry a touch more energy. It's not a celebration. No one is that bold yet. But it's a release of tension that's been coiling in everyone's shoulders since 536. Historians still argue whether the recovery of the late 530s was linear, choppy, uneven, or driven by localized weather patterns rather than global changes. Some regions rebounded earlier, others took years more. The debate continues. Was the world healing itself, or simply adapting unpredictably to the lingering effects of volcanic aerosols? Scholars disagree, as always, but they all agree that recovery did come, slowly and cautiously. You wander toward the river. Months ago, thin sheets of ice clung to its surface, even when they shouldn't. Today, the water flows more freely, rippling with a hesitant shimmer. The sunlight that touches it is still pale, but the reflection doesn't look metallic anymore. It looks wet. You crouch beside the bank, dip your fingers into the water, and feel cold instead of freezing. On the path nearby, children are playing again. Not the half-hearted fog spirits game of earlier months. Today they chase each other with sticks, giggling, pretending to duel imaginary frost giants who are finally getting sleepy. One child pauses, looks at the sky, and announces proudly, "I think the sun is growing back." You smile, because honestly, that's kind of what it feels like. You pass a small workshop where workers are repairing tools. They look healthier, still thin, still tired, but not as hollow. The potter who once complained about cracked clay now holds up a pot that dried properly. "First one all year," he says, voice cracking with pride. He runs his fingers along the firm, smooth rim and whispers, "Maybe the world still remembers how to behave." In the village square, people gather around a fire not because they're desperate for warmth, though they still need it, but because they want to talk. You hear conversations sprinkled with tentative optimism. Maybe this winter won't be as long. "I saw a bee today. A bee. My neighbour claims his bread rose properly. I think the air smells less dusty." Someone in the group adds, "I also think I blinked less today," which earns a round of laughter, joke number 1, because the fog truly did make everyone blink like confused owls. You head toward the granary expecting to see emptiness and fear, but instead you find something gentler. The grain stores are still low, dangerously low, but the atmosphere isn't panic anymore. People discuss planting techniques, trading routes reopening. A merchant even arrives with a small cart of goods calling out, "Better harvest to come." It's salesmanship, sure, but hope is hope. As evening approaches, or what passes for evening in this grey world, you stand on a hill overlooking the settlement. The dim sun sits slightly higher than usual, or maybe you think it does. The air feels less sharp. Smoke rises from chimneys in thin, relaxed curls instead of frantic plumes. Sheep graze on patches of green that weren't there before. A subtle warmth settles in your bones, not from the air, not from a fire, but from something deeper. The world is inching forward, recovering, waking up, not quickly, not fully, but undeniably. You breathe in, slowly, deeply. And for the first time in the long twilight of 536 and the years that followed, you exhale without the heaviness that's lived inside your chest for months. The recovery isn't dramatic, it isn't heroic, it isn't loud, it's shy, quiet, fragile, tender, like the first sprout after a long freeze, like the first bird call after endless silence, like the first joke landing properly in months. Maybe the sunlight is coming back, maybe life is beginning again, and maybe, just maybe, the next year won't feel like the world is ending. For now, that's enough. You wake on a morning that feels almost, like the world is remembering how to breathe. The air is still cold, still touched by that lingering dimness. But when you step outside, you realize something surprising. You can actually tell it's morning. Not because the sky's bright, it isn't, but because there's a faint golden softness trying to push through the haze, like sunlight rehearsing before stepping on stage again. You walk slowly through the settlement, noticing details you would have missed months ago when everything felt heavy and hopeless. A woman sweeping her doorstep hums under her breath. A baker puts dough outside to rise, cautiously, skeptically, but he tries. A man repairs a fence without muttering curses at the sky every few minutes. The little things you'd forgotten to miss. You head toward a ridge overlooking the valley, and as you climb, you feel the world settling into a new rhythm. Not the old, predictable one, but something steadier than the chaos of 536. The cold is still present, but it no longer feels like a threat. More like a guest who overstayed but is finally packing up. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your thoughts. After the volcanic dimming event, the world took years to rebalance. Ice core evidence suggests lingering atmospheric effects into the early 540s, and chroniclers wrote of cold summers and strange weather stretching across a decade. But slowly, season by season, year by year, the sun reclaimed the sky, temperatures steadied, and harvest returned. You crest the ridge and look out across the valley, and something catches your eye. Pockets of sunlight breaking through the haze. Weak, filtered, but unmistakably real. The kind of light that casts gentle, blurry shadows on the ground. Shadows you haven't seen properly since this all began. You lift a hand and watch your shadow settle beside you. You almost laugh. Shadows aren't supposed to be emotional, but here we are. A quirky rumour reaches your ears from a group of villagers behind you. They're convinced the sun finally won its fight against whatever swallowed it. One claims the dimming was punishment for forgotten rituals, but now the gods are in a better mood. Another insists a giant spirit has finished exhaling cold over the land. Someone says a monk predicted exactly this, though you strongly suspect he did not. Historians still argue whether the atmospheric veil dissipated suddenly or gradually. Some models suggest a quicker clearing, others point to a slow decline in particulate matter. And if you read modern interpretations, you'll find new volcanic candidates proposed every few years. The truth is probably messy, as all truths are, but the world didn't need perfect clarity then. It just needed light. You head back down the ridge, passing a farmer inspecting new shoots with pride. They're stubborn, he says, but so am I. A shepherd nearby checks on his flock, counting with a steadier voice. A group of children play near the well, laughing loudly, truly loudly, for the first time in what feels like years. You walk through the settlement as evening approaches. Lamps flicker on, but for once they aren't replacing daylight, just joining it. Homes glow, people talk, someone even sings. The atmosphere isn't fixed, not by a long shot, but it's healing. Later you sit alone, watching the dim but warming horizon. You think about everything you've walked through, the ghostly sun, the ash in the air, the bitter cold, the famine, the illnesses, the fear that crept through doorways at night. You think of scholars hunting for volcanic ghosts, of cities choking under fog, of kings staring at half-empty granaries, of people learning to ration not just food but hope. And now, this, not perfect, not bright, but better. The world changed in 536, but it kept going, and so did the people living through it. Maybe that's the real story, not the eruption, not the ash, not the dimming, but the stubborn, quiet endurance of ordinary humans who kept moving through the grey until the light returned. You take one more breath of the cool, recovering air. The worst year in history didn't end the world. It just asked the world to find new ways to begin again. And now, as our long journey settles toward its final quiet moment, let your mind drift gently away from the cold valleys and dim skies we've wandered through together. The harsh winds, the pale sunlight, the worried voices, all of it can soften now, like frost melting on a slow morning. The world of 536, with all its grey heaviness and trembling uncertainty, can fade into the background, becoming a distant landscape your thoughts no longer have to stand inside. Let your breathing slow just a little. Feel your shoulders loosen. Let your hands rest softly where they are. Picture the sky you've travelled under, once dimmed and troubled, gently warming, its light stretching back outward, timid at first, then steadier. Imagine that pale sun brightening with each slow breath you take. Not urgently, not dramatically, but like a quiet promise unfolding across a calm horizon. Allow the people you met, the farmers, the travellers, the children watching for shadows, to drift peacefully into memory. They've survived their long twilight. You don't need to carry their weight anymore. Let them rest, just as you will. Feel the air around you become softer, like the world smoothing itself out. Every inhale a small returning warmth, every exhale a gentle release of whatever tension you held through this story. The world continues its slow turning. Light always finds its way back, and you, right now, can simply let yourself sink into that truth. Let the last traces of the dim sky fade from your thoughts. Let the quiet settle. Let your mind loosen its grip on everything except the softness of this moment. You're safe, you're warm, and the long night, in history and in your mind, is finally easing away.